What's up, everybody? How are we doing today? We're reviewing Big George Foreman. The actual working title of this movie is the Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world. This is starring Chris Davis and directed by George Tillman Jr. So it will be a short, sharp review. George Foreman is an icon in sports, to be honest with you, and in boxing. He's been in some of the greatest fights of the 70s and even the 90s, and I'll come into that in a second. But overall, I very much like this movie. It's a honest biopic, a very accurate biopic. George Foreman himself is a producer on the movie, but I see the benefits of that as well as negatives. So some of the benefits being that the absolute love letter to 70s boxing and the 70s boxing era, from the arenas, from the kind of garments they used to wear, meaning the shorts, the gloves, the fighting styles, even the actors that portrayed his opponents and the other characters that were a part of his entourage and in his team, his trainers. We have Archie Moore in there, multi-time world champion himself, absolute legend of the sport. Forrest Whitaker that plays, his kind of best friend and trainer, Doc Brodus, again, another legend. And obviously his opponents, Joe Frazier appears in the movie, Muhammad Ali appears in the movie, of course, in multiple scenes. We also have Sonny Liston as well, amongst others. Howard Cosell. I thought the actor really was good there as well. Even all his kind of wives and girlfriends throughout the movie were pretty good as well. Because what I found super interesting, I think Chris Davis. So I believe he's portraying a 17-year-old George Foreman. The movie ends when he's 45. It's the same actor portraying this. What a fantastic performance by Chris Davis. A real coming out and, showing an absolutely wonderful range from being an aggressive, being brought up in a rough neighborhood adolescent, if you will, joining, an initiative to help better himself, then going on to become an Olympian, a contender, a heavyweight champion. It does portray all this. And the movie does move really fast up until kind of he becomes a world champion. And then it kind of slows down and we get to see his home life and how he is with, his parents, his sister, his brothers, because we see them earlier on in the movie and, they're all really poor. And now, he's a superstar in effect and, becomes heavyweight champion by knocking out the icon himself, which is Joe Frazier, within 2 rounds, drops him 7 times during that fight. And I don't think they actually cut between rounds in that fight as well. They show it as one long round, which was interesting. Then the movie moves on to probably the most famous fight in the history of boxing, which is the Rumble in the Jungle. And, it's a portrayal of the loser in this situation, which is George Foreman. He did get knocked out in an upset, in arguably the greatest upset in boxing history, where, an apparent over the hill Muhammad Ali, played the whole world and did a rope-a-dope game against George Foreman. He says himself he was a dope, and it was as a as a fan, literally all my life is super interesting to see a portrayal, an icon who lost that event, just to seeing their interpretation of it from their side. And yes, I am biased. I am a fan of George Foreman and that era, of boxing. So hearing him say he did a rope a dope and I was the dope, and George Foreman as a producer, I really felt had a say in suppressing his skills. Obviously, we were seeing his achievements, going to the Olympics and beating all the contenders and beating icons. Ken Norton, he discussed with the character Ali in the movie, knocking him out in a round as well. So, but we're discussing his achievements as if they are just, as if these legends that he's beating are beneath him or anything like that. No, George Foreman is one of the hardest one punch hitters in the history of human beings putting on gloves. That was his God given talent. And I found that interesting contradiction throughout the movie that, his family were obviously somewhat religious, but after obviously he lost to Ali, he had a few kind of comeback fights and he had an incident in the changing room. Again, that's a legendary moment that I've never seen on camera where he's kind of fainted and woke up and claimed to be saved by Jesus. And from that point onwards, he's retired and decided to become a minister or a preacher. It definitely slowed down at this point, but we got to see how and why his trainer trying to tell him, you're a fighter and, the money's going to stop and all of this and all the sacrifices George Foreman made to do that and all the investments that he done and, the youth center being open that he runs and obviously running out of money to do that, friends and hanger-ons, taking advantage of him and he had to come back boxing again. Being a religious man at this point. I did realize the contradictions in the movie of his character. Like I said, he came from a religious family. He would often, growing up, they would show depictions of him dismissing, a high being or God, or understanding as well at the same time, and even mentioning throughout the movie that he has God-given talent, winning, like I said, an Olympic gold medal, realizing the power that he has, the physical abilities, despite being not as skillful, or despite not just basically being brought up in a school environment in terms of, like Muhammad Ali or Joe Frazier. They were Olympians also, but they were boxing since they were 9. He started when he was about 17. Complete different and situation. And also that comes with the fame and the finances, being a zero at 17, let's say, and then being one of the most, famous people in the world and the heavyweight champion of the world by the time you're 25. Coming from a religious family and then not being thankful as a Christian in that aspect, I did find the contradictions of that. And then when he lost, he had the coming to Jesus moment. So it's not when he had these successes, it's when you're at the bottom. Juxtapositions of that and the storytelling. Yes, it is a little on the nose. It is paint by numbers. It does feel like a television movie at times. But as a boxing fan, and a huge fan of George Foreman and this era of boxing, I did love to see this being played out. I love being with these characters and with this story, because I've grown up on these stories, watched countless, if not hundreds, if not thousands of documentaries, podcasts, movies, stories of these individuals at these times. So, and then moving on to the 90s, where he's come out of retirement to try and earn money for his ministry, for his community centers. And whilst doing so, he kind of, his wife has a vision, his second wife at this point, to have a vision to become another champion, and he does so. And in the end, obviously, he loses to Evander Holyfield first, but he knocks out Michael Moore to become the oldest heavyweight champion in the world and in history, and it's still ongoing now. And the movie ends literally as his hand is raised. And just to say that ending of the movie, I did get a little choked up. I'm not gonna lie, with his trainer, played by Forrest Whitaker, a really good performance from him as well. I did get a little choked up. It was an emotional scene. It's a long movie. It's more than 2 hours, about 2 hours 10 minutes. Just him saying thank you to George Foreman, giving him that chance as his trainer, as his friend, and coming back all them years later and winning. George saying we did it. Both of them heroes themselves, and obviously 20 years since he lost the heavyweight championship of the world against Muhammad Ali in Kinshasa, Zaire, which is now known as the Republic of Congo. So yeah, lots of history. Ali was the symbol of the anti-war movement, and big George Foreman waving the American flag from the Olympics was the new contender. The obviously difference in styles, the finesse Ali would have, on his toes, with his boxing ability and his IQ, as opposed to the slugger, the juggernaut that was George Foreman, and coming through and demolishing everything in his path. Obviously mirroring the American kind of army and the US forces in obviously Vietnam and things like that, being like a war machine. The Ali being the diplomat, using his mind over his strength, to overcome battles and things like that. And, them being friends afterwards. Some of the criticisms of the movie, they do take a few liberties in this movie as well. George Foreman, being younger than Ali Frazier, Sonny Liston, Ken Norton, all these people, very reluctant and scared, in fact, to fight these legends. So, most of them, beat them all except for Ali. So it didn't really portray that. He portrayed as if he was a wrecking ball and they were just in his way. That wasn't 100% accurate. Obviously, it is a pro George Foreman story. Also, no Don King, particularly, George on one hand and Ali on the other, and him in the middle with the hair and everything. Overall, just the general rumble in the jungle. The fight content was fine. That was long enough. But the build up around it, that was a huge iconic event. It's actually delayed 6 weeks because Foreman got a cut on his eye in sparring. That was actually on camera. That incident was, but none of that. They had James Brown performing. In the lead up to that, and they had a huge event of all black musicians in the 70s were all performing in Kinshasa, Zaire, and the world's media were there, and he didn't show really any of that. He just kind of skipped through it. But I understand, obviously, it's got, like I said, the movie started when he was a child, but the real story started when George was about 17. It finishes when he's 45. So there's a long time, a lot to cover. It's not all about, Ali and the Rumble in the Jungle, but obviously that is the most iconic thing in George Foreman's illustrious career. And obviously you do get mentions of this funny little thing, this grill start having checks and that. But again, it didn't dive too much into that as well, the whole grill business situation. It showed that he actually made a lot of bad investments with his money via his accountant friends and hanger-ons and things like that. But some of them did pay off. and obviously one of them was a grill, which he didn't really go into apart from a few mentions. But like I said, being an amateur historian of this era, obviously I did notice that several things missing, but overall it is much better than I thought it would be. I did like the trailers, but I was engrossed throughout. I know the story back to front, so I know what to expect. I was excited to see it play out, and wonderful respect for George Foreman being portrayed in this movie. And 70s era boxing and even 90s era boxing, the arenas, the commentators are all lookalikes of actual commentators of the events. And some of the CG was, some of it was a little rough, some of the fight CG, but a couple of scenes did catch me off guard. How impressive. And like I said, Chris Davis, what a fantastic performance, being playing a teenager George Foreman, going into an Olympian, going into a world champion, uh, retiring, going into a minister, a preacher, and of course, turning pro again, as well as a very heavy older George Foreman, and winning the title, and physically portraying him as well throughout his life. So I liked all his two wives and his girlfriends that was portrayed in the story as well. I thought they were beautiful and they look great as well, whether it's the dresses or the makeup and the hair. Yeah, I felt like the actresses really contributed to George's personality, and I knew of his wives, but this is the most kind of I've seen of that telling, of George's home life. So I did appreciate them characters being in it as well. To summarize, definitely should go and see it. I enjoyed it, especially if you don't know the George Foreman story. Then it's definitely a watch, because you don't know who's going to win all these fights. He doesn't win all these fights, that you're watching. Had a fantastic run, and he was, people, thought that he would maybe be beaten for the rest of his life, and he'd killed people in the ring, but that didn't happen. And yeah, it's definitely a really good portrayal. Little paint by numbers, obviously. Some things missing, like Don King. He's Sonny Liston. I wish he was in it more. He's in a scene, and he's obviously an integral part to George Foreman's style growing up, based it on for heavyweight champion himself, Sonny Liston, supremely intimidating and stuff. And the movie immediately stops when he wins his second title at the age of 45. Again, I wish it carried on just a little bit. A very successful career with, in business, and, going into kind of more celebrity role, and, commentator after this. Many things he did after the age of 45, and the movie stops there. And then I was a little gutted, but it is a little long as well. It's over 2 hours. So I feel like it can be about 145, 140, but I enjoyed it. I can watch this again. In fact, I may watch it again with a different group of friends, who are sports fans, boxing fans. Yeah, and that's not only boxing fans or George Foreman, but general sports fans will like this as a biopic, because it portrays sports in that time, other sports athletes it portrays as well, and other famous sporting iconic events and arenas and things like that. So anyway, that's gonna be my short review. Definitely recommended. Thumbs up on Big George Foreman. If you're new to the channel, please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next review.